time. All right, and as I give people hello, everybody. We're so glad that you're here another week with us. And as we give people time to join, I'm going to be dropping the YouTube link in the chat for those of you that know people that want to watch this but don't have a Facebook link and account. So I am going to put that information in the chat for you right now. Share this information.
Yes, please share. I hope everyone is staying safe and cool. It is very hot season. And as you join us, be sure to put your name and where you are from in the chat so we can say hello. Give everyone a few more minutes to log in, and Christina's putting that YouTube link in the chat so you can share that. We're excited to continue our discussion about the social determinants of health and education and civic education and how all of those things interact and overlap. So as you come in, please let us know where you're joining us from. And we will get that YouTube link in the chat.
All right, so that is in the chat for those of you that are just tuning in. Welcome. Let us know where you're chiming in from. And if you have someone that, let me turn this music off. I like playing the music, but then I find myself screaming over it. Hey, everyone, this is Christina Laster and my dear sister
Lauren.
Right, all right. And we are leading Civics forward in 2023, really looking at how Civics empowers communities to advocate for themselves. Like I talked about last week, self-advocacy, then outward advocacy, right? Making sure that our families are safe and secure, and then helping others secure other families, right? And so, yes, put in the chat where you're from. Thank you. Hey, Monica, I see you. Hope you're okay. All right. Yes, from Central Mississippi. That's, I believe. Yeah.
I think Central, yeah.
Yeah, because I know you, Monica, so I can say where you're at, right? And because I know you and I know where you're at, I'm so glad you're with us, multitasking but listening. And that's all right, because this is something for everyone. Anyone can join and, you know, tune in, listen if you're driving, right? A lot of people say, well, I have to drive home at that time from work. Well, guess what? You can listen. Just like Monica, she says, yes, LOL. And so for those of you that have parents like mine who don't do a lot of engaging on Facebook or LinkedIn and will look at a YouTube channel though, right?
Right.
It's accessible from their phones or wherever they're at. We have shared that YouTube link right there in the comment field. And you can share that with your family. You can share that with your neighbors. You can share it with the people downstairs or have them come and watch you, listen to you, right? Wherever you're at, we just want you to share this information. All right, go ahead, Chrissy, and let's get started.
Let's begin. Okay, so we are continuing our discussion about the relationship between detriments of health and civic choices, and how those two things, exercising our civic rights and knowing them, how that symbiotic relationship between those two things works out. So this week, we're going to talk just a little bit. I'm going to talk to you in such a way that you can carry on this conversation with your children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, anything like that. We need to understand the different components of health and how they are impacted by our social determinants. And what does that mean for marginalized communities, communities that have been exploited? And we're going to look at how those are affected. So the first one is physical health. So again, we're going to be looking at understanding the different components of health and how they're impacted by social determinants, because it's crucial when we are trying to understand the well-being of our children. So here are some key components of health and how social determinants of health influences the health of our children. First is physical health. So physical health refers to the overall well-being of the body. Social determinants like access to healthcare services, nutritious food, safe housing, clean environments, recreational facilities, these can significantly impact a child's physical health. Lack to the access to these resources might lead to inadequate nutrition, exposure to toxins, increased risk of injuries, and limited opportunities for physical activity. Now, this can be seen in communities that are marginalized with food deserts. Whether you live in one or you've driven through one or you're adjacent to one, I wanted you to really start paying attention to, as you go through neighborhoods in your city or even your own neighborhood, and ask yourself, how much access is there to good quality food? And that has a huge impact on our children's physical health. The other area, the second one, is mental and emotional health. Mental and emotional health is a child's psychological and emotional well-being. Social determinants like family support, stable and nurturing relationships, access to mental health services, and exposure to violence or trauma, all of those shape a child's mental health. And it has longevity, it has long-lasting effects. It carries them into their adulthood, which then affects their children, and that's where the term generational trauma comes from. Adverse experience or limited access to support can increase stress, anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges. Now, how is this affected in marginalized communities? Medical access to mental health, when someone has Medi-Cal, is followed by a response to crisis care. So that means children usually have to exhibit crisis level of mental health before Medi-Cal, which is the state funded medical opportunities. So children under that plan usually have to reach a level of crisis in mental health before they have access to mental health care. And even then, it's usually on a short-term 6-month plan. There is I don't even know if shortage is the word, because there's hardly, the opportunities for mental health for children is long waits, not even necessarily steady appointments, and not having that access to that mental health care, we know has effects that often, honestly, can be deadly, because the suicide rates in communities that are marginalized is affected by this. So the third area that our children are affected is their social well-being. So social well-being refers to a child's ability to form and maintain positive relationships, to feel connected to their community, and have a sense of belonging. Social determinants like family dynamics, peer relationships, community support, social norms, and cultural factors influence a child's social well being. When those are lacking, when there's a lack of social support, things like discrimination, social isolation, or adverse family circumstances can negatively impact a child's social development and well being. Those occurrences that I just listed, like discrimination, social isolation, adverse family circumstances, if a child has not developed a healthy way to respond to those unfortunate life circumstances, that then can create a path, and sometimes a lifelong path, of dealing with an imbalance. And in our communities, oftentimes, we see a lack of affordable ways for belonging. If you have ever had a child play a sport, when they're younger and it's the sport at the community, center, maybe that's affordable. But when they get to high school, it is not as affordable anymore. And we know that sports is one way to build that sense of belonging. And those opportunities are not available for everyone. And the same is true as, let's say, like theater or the arts, that perhaps those are the kind of things that we should be championing for cities to offer free of charge or very low cost. And again, I'm sure many of you in the past or even this summer wanted to sign your child up maybe for a camp, and you realized how quickly those spots went. And to think about how many children really needed those to create that sense of belonging, yet those opportunities were not available. The fourth one is cognitive development. Cognitive development relates to a child's intellectual growth, including their ability to think, learn, and problem solve. Social determinants like access to quality education, early childhood development programs, literacy resources, and a stimulating home environment play a vital role in a child's cognitive development. Disparities in educational opportunities, limited access to early childhood programs, and inadequate learning environments can then hinder a child's cognitive development and limit their future possibilities. This really speaks to one of the hosts for our thing, Willie J. Frink College Prep, in that we are specifically seeking to close that gap of disparity, to offer to children and families who are not finding success in the school setting they're in a place for success, a place where we are offering a pedagogy that is culturally relevant, that is seeking to educate the whole child. All of these things listed. When you educate the whole child, you take into account all of those things. And the fifth area is behavioral choices.
Can I say something? I want to chime
Yes,
in.
please.
So for those of you that are watching, and a lot of people might not, think about this. So I want you to be actively and attentively listening, right? Hearing yourself or your community described as lowest performing, disparate, disadvantaged, right? Marginalized, right? We cannot normalize those types of labels. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not good. Okay. And we always have to think, and when we get into my section, we're going to talk about again power, right? We always have to think about how many communities were placed at the margins. I don't want to have this discussion without the opportunity to state the truth and the fact of the condition that multiple communities are in, including Bakersfield, California, including Central Mississippi, where Monica's at, right? And so let us be aware that when these labels are being utilized in policy and legislation in government and institutions, right? To say, yeah, but we don't want that to be the norm, right? We are not uh, disadvantaged people. Do you know us? Or were we pushed by some people having privilege and other people not having access? So when we talk about quality education, we talk about what kind of access to quality education. When we talk about healthcare, we talk about access to quality healthcare, right? And these are fundamental human rights, right? These are fundamental human rights. And so I just want to make sure that we are very intentional about the place where we're coming from, and also help you to be as intentional and paying attention about the way that our communities are labeled and the way that we are kept in certain statuses. And that's why we're here first to do self advocacy and then others advocacy.
Right. Thank you for that. Perhaps a better phrase is historically excluded. So there are
Oh,
communities
yeah.
that have been historically excluded from opportunities for access to healthcare, sense of belonging, all of those things that were discussed. Same is true for behavioral choices. These are choices that children make that can impact their health, like eating habits, physical activity levels, substance use, and risk-taking behaviors. Social determinants of things like community norms. What do they see out their window, out their door? What is considered acceptable in their community? Peer influences, parental modeling, and availability of healthy choices influence a child's behavioral choices. So that goes back to our first point of food deserts. Lack of access to healthy food options, limited opportunities for physical activity. That is looking at neighborhoods and the different levels of opportunities for physical activity. Look at the parks. Look at the pools. Is there even a pool? If there is a pool, is there a lifeguard? Is there a safe place to play basketball or football or to play on swings? All of those affect our children's health. And as someone who lives in Bakersfield, I can tell you there is a limited choice for healthy activities, especially in this extreme heat we're having, triple digits into the teens, and dangerous air quality. Bakersfield has some of the worst air. So when those two things are coupled, heat and bad air quality, there are very limited choices of things for children to do. The children who don't have the luxury of being able to get in the car and go to the coast for a couple days. The children that are here in Bakersfield, where are they to go? So that does affect their health. So when we can understand how these social determinants affect these different components, behavioral choices, cognitive development, social well-being, mental, emotional health, physical health, when we understand how all of those play together, it is essential for us to have that understanding when we want to address health disparities and promote the overall well-being of children. When we are able, and I say we, I do mean we as a community, when we are able to address these social determinants, such as improving access to quality healthcare, promoting safe and supportive environments, enhancing educational opportunities, and fostering strong social connections, then we can create a community. We can create conditions that support optimal health and development of children, because healthy, strong, mentally and physically healthy and strong children come from communities that support these high levels of social determinants. Now, Christina is going to talk about one specific aspect of this that has to do with healthcare, because not just access to it, but how to navigate it. because I am sure every single one of us, either ourselves or has been with someone in a situation where the healthcare process was overwhelming. And so part of our civic education is to know how to navigate that healthcare process. So Christina is going to talk about that.
All right. And so, time for review. Okay. If you've been tuning in over these 4 weeks, you've learned that this gets progressively more intense. And so, I asked this question. But first, I want to define power: the ability to do something or act in a particular way, especially as a faculty or quality, the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events, supply a device with mechanical or electrical energy, move or travel with great speed or force. Okay. And you see at the bottom, it says, do you connect with any of these? Okay. So the personal responsibility on that is, who should have power? For whose benefit should this power be had? At whose expense should this power be had? We were looking at the United States three branches of government, all guided by what is the Supremacy Clause or the Constitution, the US Constitution. Those branches, one being the legislative, the executive, the other the judicial, all wanting to fiercely guard and protect their own power. The legislative branch being further broken down for checks and balances, separation of powers, into a bicameral, entity which we call Congress, having the House of Representatives and Senate, and the executive branch being the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. Okay, and then all of those entities underneath the president's jurisdiction. And then the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, federal, state courts. All right. And then we look at, purposes of local government, right? So we have one U.S. government, 50 state governments, and 89,476 local governments. And you can see how those are further broken down in the county, city, town, school district, and special district. Okay. And their functions are around responsibilities, roles, and responsibilities: education, fire protection, law enforcement, health. We're talking about health. Local health departments oversee immunization and disease control. We're going to be getting deeper into that. Records maintenance, right? Keepers of deeds, marriage licenses, motor vehicle, all of those things. Sanitation, okay? And so we're talking about health as a domain, social determinants of health, and looking at quality health as a domain. We're going to be talking about informed consent. Okay. So this is something that I want you to know about. And I'm sorry, that's not the first slide. This is the first slide. Hello. All right. And so informed consent is a principle in medical ethics and medical law. So y'all know I'm the know your rights lady. When it comes to every single domain, I'm going to talk about policy and legislation and what is the code, the law, and the statute. Okay. So when we're talking about health in the social determinants of health, looking at informed consent as a principle in medical ethics and medical law and media studies, that a patient must have sufficient information and understanding before making decisions about their medical care, right? And so, full or valid informed consent has various definitions and standards, okay? But we're going to look at what is the basic definitions and standards to have a full or valid informed consent within the US, okay? So within the US, definitions of informed consent vary, and the standard required is generally determined by the state. Let's dive deeper into what that definition starts out at, and then we're going to go over, let's see. Okay, let me take, guys, give me 1 second. I'm going to take this one out. And then I'm going to zoom in. Don't you worry. I know it's tiny. I know it's tiny. I got my grandma eyes on today, boy. I tell you that. All right. And so as you can see, is that good, Chrissy?
It's not.
Okay, let me do it some more, y'all. Look, we're grandma friendly up in here. Okay, so if you see
That's better.
right here, I'm at the National Library of Medicine, the National Center of Biotechnology Information. And like I told you, make sure you're at a site where you can know it's an official site, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be on Sheen looking for National Library of Medicine information. Okay, this is not shopping. This is reading the official website and what is the definitions and how things are defined. An official website of the United States government. Okay, so let's go down. And as you can see, this is pretty recent. I like to find things that are as new as possible. And so you have that last update being June 11th, 2022. Okay, so let's look at this definition. Oh, went too far down. All right, so we have informed consent as the process in which a healthcare provider educates a patient about the risks, benefits, and alternatives of a given procedure or intervention. The patient must be competent to make a voluntary decision about whether to undergo the procedure or intervention. Informed consent is both an ethical and legal obligation of medical practitioners in the US and originates from the patient's right to direct what happens to their body. Okay? So if somebody told you something different, they're lying. Come and find the information and know the information the next time you step into a medical practitioner's office. Okay? Implicit is providing informed consent is an assessment of the patient's understanding, rendering an actual recommendation, and documentation of the process. The Joint Commission requires documentation of all elements of, oh, that's too fast. Sorry. Of all the elements of informed consent in a form, progress notes, or elsewhere in the record. The following are the required elements for documentation of informed consent discussion. Okay, number one. Okay, I want you guys to see that. Number one, the nature of the procedure. Number two, the risks and benefits and the procedure. Number three, reasonable alternatives. So if you are going to a medical practitioner that's telling you this is it, and you're asking for reasonable alternatives or a what we call a second opinion, and they're
Mm-hmm.
saying you don't need that, you need to understand that you have the right to know about a reasonable alternative. Okay, risk and benefits of alternatives, and assessment of the patient's understanding of elements 1 through 4. Okay, it is the obligation of the provider to make it clear that the patient is participating in the decision making process and avoid making the patient feel forced to agree to with the provider. Okay, so the provider must make a recommendation and provide their reasoning for said recommendation. So you should not be walking up in the doctor's office feeling like this. You should not be
Right.
exiting the dentist's office or any kind of medical practitioner's office feeling like you are forced to consent to anything that they said, like take this prescription. I mean, you have to understand that you have rights and they have a legal and ethical obligation to answer these questions without pressuring you into making a decision. Okay. And so if you, like I said, don't walk in feeling like that. Now, if you feel like this after asking questions, right,
Mm-hmm.
about your own medical treatment plan, about the alternatives, the benefits, the harms, and the risks, then you're that's not good either. So you shouldn't feel like this or like this, right? Because you're not participating actively in your own health care. Now remember, it is your health care. right? And so you need to be an active participant in understanding the nature, the risks, the benefits, reasonable alternatives, what your medical treatment plan is laying out. Being an active participant in that is having informed consent, right? And so let's go down. Adequacy of informed consent. The required standard for informed consent is determined by the state. Now, we saw that in the definition. Okay. The three acceptable legal approaches to adequate informed consent are: one, subjective standard. What would this patient need to know and understand to make an informed consent? And I'm going to interject right here that that information be given and provided in a culturally congruent way with ethnically matched providers. Okay, we know that some of the data is indicative of the lack of cultural congruence with ethically matched providers, because even in maternal health we see this lack of congruence and the impact that it has on black moms having black babies, and they want a
Mhm.
doctor that understands culturally the dimensions of what they're discussing with them. Okay. And so we know that babies thrive when there's some cultural congruence, and moms do in their pregnancy when there's cultural congruence with ethnically matched providers. Reasonable patient standard. What would the average patient need to know to be an informed participant in the decision? Reasonable physician standard. What would a typical physician say about this procedure? And I am going to drop this in the chat for those of you that want to follow along or that need this information, just to like kind of look at it later, and also have the information on hand to show your doctor, like, look, I am supposed to have adequate informed consent. And these are the standards, the appropriate standards and approaches. Can we go over this, right? You don't want a doctor that's always rushing you into decisions and making you feel like they don't have time to answer your questions, okay? Especially when it comes to our children. I've had that before, and I've stopped the appointment and said, it seems as though you have somewhere else to be, and my children's health is extremely important to me. Let me know when you're willing to dedicate 30 or more minutes, right? Not just pop in, pop out, so that I can ask questions about what it is that you're doing as you're, doing a physical or whatever that means. And then I can also ask questions about why you need the information that you had me fill out in the lobby, depending on the age and stage of development. Like, right, that I want to know, right? How is this information going to be utilized in your overall assessment of my child's health or my health? And what can we do together to create a medical treatment plan for any conditions that you may, determine that are there, right? That is what I say. And if we can't do that, then guess what? I don't believe that you're the right match for me and my family. And that's just the bottom line, right? So many states use the reasonable patient standard because it focuses on what a typical patient would need to know to understand the decision at hand. However, it is the sole obligation of the provider to determine which approach is appropriate for a given situation. Okay. And so right here we have exceptions to informed consent. And I always say pay attention to the exceptions and exemptions, right? Several exceptions to the requirement for informed consent include: the patient is incapacitated, right? Life, but you need to know how incapacitated is defined in your state. Okay. Don't just assume that the meaning of incapacitated means someone that just doesn't have the complete wherewithal to make decisions for themselves. If the standard and the rules and the definition may not be what you think, right? And so you need to look those up so that you can have an awareness of what that is. Number two, life threatening emergencies with inadequate time to obtain consent, right? And so ultimately, medical professionals are going to determine to save someone's life. Okay. And that's the humane thing to do. Okay, if someone's getting life lighted somewhere and needs emergency medical treatment, life saving treatment, and there's not adequate time to obtain consent, then yes, they're going to make that decision to provide that life saving treatment. Okay, voluntary waived consent. If the patient's ability to make decisions is questioned or unclear, an evaluation by a psychiatrist to determine competency may be requested. A situation may arise in which a patient cannot make decisions independently but has not designated a decision maker. In this instance, the hierarchy of decision makers, which is determined by each state's laws, must be sought to determine the next legal surrogate decision maker. If this is unsuccessful, a legal guardian may need to be appointed by the court. Okay, so that's very clear about the exceptions to informed consent. Children and informed consent. Children typically under 17 cannot provide informed consent. As such, parents must permit treatments or interventions, and I'll show you at the end what why this is different in California, okay, and some other states. In this case, it it not termed informed consent, but informed permission. An exception to this rule is a legally emancipated child, legally emancipated, not just because they walked in and said they're emancipated or I want to be emancipated, right? Who may provide informed consent for himself. Some, but not all, examples of emancipated minor include minors who are under 18 and married, minors who are serving in the military, minors who are able to prove financial independence, or minors who are mother of children, married or not. Right? Legislation regarding minors and informed consent is state based as well. It is important to understand the state laws. And like I said, we're going to go over the California specific area of consent. And then you have this area of informed consent for blood transfusions. Okay, and I know that there is a lot of information about this, and we're not going to go over all of the types of transfusions down here. But it's just important to know that there is a lot of information for those of you that may need to know. Informed consent is essential to patient autonomy, right? Informed consent requires a thorough understanding of transfusions and the ability to convey this information to a patient in a way that they can understand it. So, again, we're talking about in a way that you can understand and not feeling like this or this,
Mm-hmm.
right? You shouldn't feel like this or this. And I'm just going to keep repeating that because it's important for you to understand to know that you have rights. Okay. However, obtaining consent often has deficiencies in the explanation where benefits may not be entirely true and risks related are omitted. It has been shown that involving experts from transfusion units in obtaining informed consent for transfusion results in patients having a better understanding of the risks and benefits. So here they're saying that another expert needs to be the one who obtains the informed consent, right? And there is data that shows that those experts who are, from transfusion units are better with informing the patient, and the results in patients having a better understanding of the risks and benefits is higher. That is that it's better that way. Okay. However, always involving an expert may not be the most efficient way to obtain consent. Although new graduate physicians, and I want y'all to pay attention to that, right? If they're new as a medical practitioner, they may not have as much knowledge practicing, right? You're talking about going from theory to practicum, right? There's a lot of textbook knowledge, but they may not have a lot of knowledge in certain areas of practice, and you may have a situation that is unique, right? And so they're saying right here, new graduate physicians have a knowledge deficit when it comes to transfusion medicine. That is very clearly stated. Okay. However, physicians that had previous transfusion medicine educated displayed more understanding than those who did not, as most physicians will need to obtain informed consent for a transfusion at one point in their career. It could be argued that physicians should have enough education in regards to transfusion medicine, and then it's going to talk about different types of transfusions and their indications. And so, like I said, you can go in and read that. I'll just scroll down so you can see there's a lot. Okay. So let's look at the clinical significance. So informed consent is required for many aspects of healthcare, these including consent for treatment, medical treatment plan. Remember that. You can ask your doctor if you have, something that you're dealing with. What is the medical treatment plan? Can I see it?
Oh, did we lose you, Christina? Christina, I don't hear you. I don't know if it's something with just mine. Okay, I don't know if it's just me. If you can hear me, can someone please say in the comments? Or if you can hear Christina? Oh, I think we lost her because her information went away. But all of this is so very good. And I think all of us can think back on times when we had wished that we had known this information and how much easier it would have made navigating hospital stays or medical, especially if there is a medical emergency. To know, I just think of the two pictures Christina kept showing. We do not want to be felt coerced into something, being felt as though we didn't have a choice, so we took the medicine. We didn't have a choice, so we had the procedure. But on the other hand, we don't want to be overwhelmed. I call it like doctor ease, medical ease. I will tell my doctor, listen, I'm smart, but I'm not a doctor. So please say it in words that I understand. And my doctor and I have a relationship where she does that. And if it's spoken in terms that I can understand, then I can grasp. But I appreciate her taking the time to make sure that I'm able to make an informed decision. I'm not sure if we lost Christina or what's going on. I'm going to text her real quick and see if she'll respond to that. Because if the computer is acting up, she might be able to see a text. And then she took down her wonderful information for us to follow. Does anyone want to put in a chat, maybe quickly share a time when having this information, knowing about informed consent, would have made a difference in your healthcare choices? Statistics show that Black maternal health care has Black women at a higher instance of complications and death. And a lot of that comes from the lack of culturally appropriate communication. Not that long ago, I remember reading how doctors being trained today, still think that Black women have a higher threshold for pain. And that's why so often their request for pain medication or bringing to the attention of the doctor a painful situation is not taken very seriously. And those can have catastrophic results, sometimes even death. There is a young man that I actually follow on Instagram, And what he did as part of his medical schooling, he's a Black man. I actually believe he's African, but I do know he's Black. He realized that in all of his textbooks, he was doing a dermatology round. In all of his textbooks, the majority of the dermatological skin pictures were on lighter colors. And more important, oh, this is Christina calling me. Let's see what she's saying. Yes, I am still live. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. 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 Perfect. All right. Bye. All right. She's having technical difficulties. She said she's going to have to reboot her computer and then she'll be back on. Okay. Thank you. Oh, I want to say your name right. Guy Atkins. You can hear me good. For a while there, I wasn't sure what was going on, but now I know that Christina lost connection. She is going to reboot her computer and come back up. But I was saying about the gentleman for dermatology, not only did he notice the illustrations in his textbook were on lighter skin, but that on dark skin, it actually looked different. So he made it a point for his project to photograph all of the common and uncommon skin disorders, but on darker skin. And when you look at the differences, they're pretty acute. You can tell how someone who has only seen them on lighter skin would not recognize it on darker skin. And that's just one example of actually medical racism is what they call it, but how people are recognizing it and doing things to rectify it. So while we wait for Christina, I'm going to pull up our social determinants of health. Unless, honestly, if someone would like to share just a very quick comment about a time when you wish that you had understood your medical rights more, your informed consent, or when you did know them and you exercise them. So if anyone in the chat wants to share that, I'll take a minute and we'll read those and share those. But as we do that, we can review our social determinants of health. Let's see what we can talk a little bit about. Well, we're doing that now. The importance of healthcare access in achieving better health outcomes. We can just even take the example I gave of skin disorders and dermatology and things like that, that if you have something, a condition, and you went to a doctor that could not recognize it because of skin tone, what a difference that would make. All right, so I see that Olivia left. Very important. She says, I wish I knew I could choose a Black therapist from an early age. Thank you for sharing, Olivia. Do you think it's also important, not only culturally a Black therapist, but also female? I know some people find that also to be an important determinant. So if you want to comment on that, Olivia, thank you for that. Then we have someone else sharing, knowledge of this information would have made a difference in a decision made for a mother regarding 50-50 chance of surviving a surgery. She did not make that. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I can imagine how frustrated you must feel knowing that it was just a matter of information. That if you had had different information, you might have been able to make just a different decision that maybe would have had a different outcome. So thank you for sharing. Did anyone else have anything they want to share? I'll give Olivia a minute to respond. Here she is. She said, yes, that I could choose exactly who I wanted and that I don't have to stick with one therapist. That's exactly right. If it's not working with a therapist or a doctor, you have the right to say, this is not working. Remember when Christina showed before, one of the things that we have is a right to a second opinion. This is Christina calling again. I wonder, she's having trouble getting on. Hold tight. Hello. Oh, perfect. Okay. Okay. All right. No, we're actually having a good discussion in the chat about having this kind of knowledge is empowering. So this is good. And I'll let them know, and then we'll close that out, and we'll be sure to look for that. Okay. Perfect. All right. Okay. Oh, okay, Empress. That's you. I know you as Empress. Yes, Olivia. We have the right to say, this is not working. I want a different therapist. And it's not being impolite. And it's not being mean. And it's not being unprofessional. That is part of our informed consent, is being able to choose who we feel that we have the best connection with and can best adhere to our medical needs. So Empress, now that I know it's you, hi, Empress. That was Christina. She cannot get her computer to power up. And so what she's going to do is she's going to record the rest of her lesson on informed consent. And then that will be put on the Facebook page. And I'll be sure to share it to Instagram. And she'll probably attach it to her LinkedIn and all of that. So we're going to close this out knowing that we can see the rest of Christina's lesson recorded, and I'm sure she'll get that up in the next day or so. I want to thank everyone, Empress and Olivia, for sharing and for commenting. And thank you so much. And next week, education and employment. We're going to discuss the so we can understand the impact of education and employment on health outcomes. We're going to discuss education and employment disparities among historically excluded communities. We're going to look at resources and strategies to improve education and employment opportunities. Thank you so much. I especially want to thank Olivia and Empress for coming on and commenting. And I'm sure next week we'll hear from other people. And so this is great. Look for Christina's recorded lesson in the next few days. All right, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.